Eduard Habsburg, Archduke of Austria, is Hungary's ambassador to the Holy See, and he's my guest coming up on this special episode of Dig Life Deep. I've had Eduard on my show before, so I wanted to have him back to discuss his new book when I heard it was released by Sophia Institute Press. It's called Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World. He's an engaging person, sometimes quite witty, and I've described him during my interview as a Renaissance man. He may take exception to that. Maybe he was flattered, I don't know. But at a time of so much social and economic uncertainty, wars, conflicts, experimentation, restlessness and polarization in so many nations, as we latch on to leaders we've charged with fixing our problems, Eduard Habsburg sees the answer to much of our deep-seated problems in the revival of families and family life. Eduard is a Catholic, so naturally he sees that revival in the growth of strong, what he calls wholesome Catholic families with many children. I invite you to enjoy this interview conducted by me from here in the US with Eduard Habsburg in Rome. He talks about his new book, Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. We discuss much more, including the demographic crisis gripping the globe, the collapse in the birth rate, and how Hungary has responded. We dived into the history of the Habsburg Empire and revisit the fateful journey in 1914 that resulted in the assassination of Eduard Habsburg's direct ancestor and family member, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That tragic event, history tells us, triggered and led to the First World War. In my interview, Eduard Habsburg today has a unique an interesting take on the assassination of the Archduke. You won't want to miss it. I first asked Eduard what prompted his new book, which follows on the heels of his last work, which I interviewed him on. It was called The Habsburg Way, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times, also from Sophia Institute Press. So we kick off the interview with that, him explaining why he wrote the book, and then we dive into a lot of other subjects. I think you're going to enjoy this. I did, and you will get some inspiration, and you will find Eduard an engaging fellow. Take care.
I wanted to write a follow-up to the Habsburg Way. It was supposed to be slightly Habsburg themed too. And as they say in script writing, write what you know. What can I talk about with competence is family life. I'm married, I have 6 children, and I have a very happy marriage, and am now a grandfather. And all of that is a topic that's very dear to my heart. And as the Habsburgs are the family representing family among European royal families, I decided to write a book about how to build a wholesome family, because as much as I had a really great and wonderful family life experience, I see that around me, many people don't. I have the impression many people don't even know how to begin. They don't know where to find a good spouse. They don't know when to get married. They don't know how many children to have. So I thought I'd write a little self-help book, a little starter kit for a happy marriage.
Yes, there's so much in it. I read it, and I was impressed by it. It's a good read. I recommend it. I'm sure some people who will pick it up, there may be cynics and critics out there and say, well, it's easy for Eduard, an Archduke of the Habsburg Empire, an imperial legacy, people of wealth and grandeur and so on and so forth. But, maybe the ordinary person, somebody living paycheck to paycheck, or people maybe in impoverished circumstances saying this is so distant from their reality that they can't kind of attach themselves to it.
I would answer to that I had my 6 children at the time when I lived, barely made it paycheck to paycheck. We are not rich because, as the more history-minded of you might know, we lost a world war about 100 years ago. We don't live in castles. We don't come with a heritage. I didn't inherit anything. I had to earn my money. And most of those children came when I really barely made it. What I would answer to these people is having children and having a family is the basic human experience. It shapes us, it makes us what we are, and it turns us into the best us that we can be. And that is independent of whether you are as rich as Elon Musk, who has fathered several children, unfortunately with several women, or as poor as an Irish family in the 19th century. A large family is the greatest thing in the world. And as most people are pointing to 1.5 children, at least in Europe, I'm trying to go out there and encourage people to have lots of children.
Yeah, well, that's one of the recurring themes in your book. Large families you advocate, and you do make the point that some couples sadly are not able to have children, and you make an allowance for that and how they can get through that. It doesn't have to be a sad time for them. So that's one of the recurring themes. Have a large family. There's a lot of solidarity and support. It combats loneliness. And there's a lot of other benefits which you describe. And it's also clearly a Catholic themed book, having been attached to your Catholic faith. Let me pick you up on the large family advocacy in your book. We see throughout Europe and in the Western world a total collapse in the size of families, in 1 or 2, 3 generations, a collapse in the fertility rate. We see it here in the United States and all throughout Europe. What's your thoughts about that? Having large families is a way to restore some demographic balance in our Western world?
Well, you're speaking to a Hungarian ambassador. So my country is of the opinion that letting in migrants is not the way to solve our problems in Western society. We should encourage people to go back to large families. Now, my country, Hungary, is trying to do that. We are encouraging people to have larger families. We're doing this by incentives, by tax help, and by other things. Also by creating an atmosphere of pro-family in society. For instance, when you land in Budapest airport, you will see posters, Hungary, family-friendly country. The message of the government is it's not only okay to have a large family, it's something, in fact, wonderful. You never hear that anywhere else in Western Europe, wherever you go, not in public space, not in advertising, not on TikTok, not in films, not in series. Large families simply don't seem to exist. And if people never experience family at home and never experience them in social media or anywhere else, how would they even get to the idea? Also, having a large family may be a hindrance to your career. And we're being told that the only thing that counts is a career. And the only way a woman can show her worth is by having a great career. The possibility that having lots of children and raising children to be happy human beings could be a proof of your worth doesn't even cross their minds anymore. So what I'm saying is it's not even ill will that people don't have large families. They simply never think about it. They're being told that there's only one way to do this. Like if you want to get married, if not, live together. And then if you work and you earn a lot of money, and then in the last possible moment, you might want to have the child experience and have 1, maximum 2 children. That's how most people think this works. But it didn't the last 10,000 years, and that was not a sign of primitivity or fundamentalism. It was just a human experience. I'm just trying to bring some of that back into our daily life.
Yes, so there's sort of an anti-family ideology running rampant through many of our European countries and the EU countries. There are some analysts would say that because of this collapse in the fertility rate and the shifting demographics throughout Europe, it explains in part a lot of upheaval in European politics, because there is the question of propping up a lot of the welfare benefits and the programs that an aging society is going to require. Um, and on the other hand, a lot of industries are lacking, in workers. So there is this question of filling those gaps. So there is a demographic crisis in Europe. Do you see it as contributing to some of the uh, upheaval as well in countries like France and in Germany?
I would try to explain it the other way around. I would say if you grow up in a numerous family, and I could watch this with my children now, you get a total different outlook on life. You learn from the first moment of your life that you're not the center of the universe. You learn that you live together with other people and share uh, your living space with them. You might not be able to have the latest phone, the latest computer, not even a computer for yourself if you have 6 or 7 siblings. You learn to look after the smaller siblings because your parents will be too busy with the babies. And you, by having a large family, your experience is that of solidarity, of looking after the others, of getting along with other people, of learning about your place in society. And people like that will build a just and good and stable society in the future. Growing up alone, you don't learn these things. It's possible by good education, but with a numerous family, you learn all of that automatically. It should be in the interest of every state to encourage people to have 6, 7, 8 children, because that way you have a place where a new generation of incredibly wonderful citizens grows. So that's what I'm saying is the reality is most people don't grow up in healthy and wholesome families, don't perhaps grow up with both of their parents, have the experience of being raised by a single mom because the husband ran away, have only one sibling and never experienced all these things I just described. Of course, our society is wounded and hurt, and there is unrest. Yes, I think that contributes.
Let's go back to Hungary and the policies of the Hungarian government to encourage larger families with incentives and tax breaks and so on. So, where is it at right now? The demographics in Hungary, is it rising
Like
in
like
terms of the?
until up more or less 10, 12 years ago, it was just going down. We were very, very low. I think you have to be 2.3 children per mother to, I think, even keep it from falling further, and we were far below this. And Hungary, since about 10, 11 years, we have a very strong pro-family politics. And yes, the birth rate is very minimally going up. It's a very slow process to turn that thing around. But what we have is we have a steep decline of divorces, a steep decline of abortions, a steep growth of marriages, and we have a very slow but slowly crawling up demographical. But my theory here is that a state can only get you so far.
Mhm.
Most people will then decide not to have 1.5 but 3 children, or 4 maximum. But you would need larger families. To do that, you need faith. I believe that to make that jump, to a really large family where you put your entire life on the line and everything you knew so far, you need faith. A state cannot prescribe faith. It doesn't work like that. So the state can only bring you so far. But if we don't have a real regrowth in faith, then we won't have large families, and this won't change. Hungary is still a Catholic country. It also has a strong Calvinist, which is a Református in Hungary population. What Hungary has done, however, in the last years has had a result. And I'm, as a father of 6 children, I profited from that over the last years. For instance, when you expect your first baby, you can get a grant of $30,000, which is a lot in a Central European country. And after your third child, you don't pay that back. After your 3 children, your income tax is incredibly low. After your 4th child, a woman never pays taxes again in her life. We have financial aid for apartments, for building houses. The state offers a salary for grandparents who look after grandchildren, and the state will help funding your family van if you have a bigger family. So all of these things, that's a very important thing. If you know that the state will have your back and not let you alone, if you decide to embark on the adventure of a large family, you feel safer and you would rather go for more children. If the state tells you that's your private hobby, if you want to have children, other people have cars, then most people just won't dare to go there. So that's what Hungary is trying to do. As I say, the results are there. They're not as spectacular as one would imagine, like this with a magic wand, but it's turning around and other countries don't. I just give you one example. In the States, I regularly meet people who have large families, but I live in Rome since 9 years, and I can count the moments I saw a pregnant woman crossing the street in front of my car on one hand, maximum 2. You don't see women expecting babies in Rome. Italy used to be the country for lots of children and family. It's the country of the bambinos, and there is nothing left of that. If you want to see many children, you have to go to the zoo. Sometimes you see children there, but you don't see children in public space. And when we walk with our family, and they see a huge family walking, they say, "Oh, this is so beautiful." And then you tell them, "Oh, why don't you have so many children?" And then they say, no, it's not reasonable. It's not reasonable. Sorry, not reasonable. So,
in other words, the cost of living, you mentioned that in your book, that the excuse provided in Italy is because it's too costly to have children.
yes,
That's the common.
yes, and I always tell people, we're living in the time with the greatest security, the best medical support, the best social system, and we live in the greatest of all times in Europe, and we can't afford to have children. While our ancestors sometimes had 7, 8, and 9 children and lived under very, very dire circumstances, we can have children. It's just a mind flip. It's just trying to go a different path. But of course, it only works if both of you are on board with this. And that's why I make a very strong point in my book to think hard and well about who you will marry, whom you will marry. And I even give a checklist of 5 points, what to look for if you want a wholesome, lifelong, fulfilling marriage. And as I had it. So, and yes, the first point is not marry your cousins, as most Americans believe the Habsburgs think. We don't do that anymore.
I want to go back again to Hungary, because you also said declining abortion rates and declining divorce rates. Is that related to the government policies?
I think that that by financial help you can convince people not to abort children, and you can convince people to stay married and stay together, because people realize that if you stay married together, you have a better chance of raising these children. I believe it is believed that these rates somehow are connected to our family politics, because these numbers are of the last years. So it is believed. But there are people who criticize us. There are other people who believe that Hungary is trying to keep women at home like 50 or 100 years ago. That's not the case. The Hungarian government will support you whether you work or whether you stay at home. I strongly encourage mothers, at least, to stay at home, at least at the beginning of the life of their children, because you don't want to give away those formative years where a child's mind, soul, and heart are shaped to somebody else, just in the name of a career out there. But I do believe that we have results, although they are not as spectacular as would be nice. but that's just the way humans are. I can just say, when it's about money and about tough economic decisions, I know how it is when I made publicity on Twitter for one of my first books, and I got millions of views on my tweets, and very few people actually bought the book. It's one thing to click.
Oh, interesting.
It's one
Interesting.
thing to click. It's another thing to dole out your cash. Actually, to dole out your cash. It's like, and that's you cannot make people have lots of children, and but I want to encourage them. My message is really, this is the greatest adventure of my life. I am what I am today because of that, and I want everybody to experience that.
Yep, no, it comes across in the book, the happiness you and your wife and your six children have had, your lives together. One of them, at least, is married. You've grandchildren or a grandchild. I can't quite remember. I want to ask you also that because Viktor Orban is a very well-known figure on the world stage, and he has both cheerleaders and critics. The critics call him autocratic. The cheerleaders would say he's pursuing the proper agenda. He's getting the job done. Just look at Hungary today, where it's at and where it was a generation or two ago.
I'm a diplomat working for the Hungarian state, so you would probably hear more positive things about Viktor Orban from me than negative things. However, I believe that you can explain a lot of the anger against Orban by the fact that he stands for a national vision of a country, for a sovereign vision of a country, for conservative and traditional values, and for a Christian vision of a country. Now, all of those are poisonous words in today's, at least Western European media and world. And if you have 80% of the journalists in Western Europe profess themselves to be either left-leaning or middle-left, because no respectable journalist is right of the middle. You never are in Europe. You're just on the left. And then you have what you might call a right-wing politician that has been re-elected 4 times with 2/3 majority. That's a mix that couldn't even work if Orban was a mixture of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. But he's a Hungarian Calvinist who speaks his mind and who is very strongly standing for Hungarian sovereignty and independence and against migrants. That's an explosive mix that doesn't work. I can just tell you that I just 2 days ago was present when Pope Francis met Viktor Orban. They had a long conversation. It was a real meeting of hearts and minds. Really, you could tell when they came out. They smiled, they walked closely, they talked to each other, and it was a deep understanding on so many levels. Now, people say that can't be true. That can't be true. He's an autocrat. Well, he's an autocrat that has been re-elected by the Hungarian people. Hungarians are very clever people, and they aren't pushed to the polling booths on gunpoint. They would throw him out if they wouldn't believe that he's doing what Orban. There's a very nice video online where you can see Orban walking to a newspaper vendor, and he says to the guy, which are the 3 best-selling newspapers that you sell every day? And he points to 3 newspapers, and those are the opposition newspapers. He said, if I was an autocrat, would there be opposition newspapers, and would they be the best-selling ones? No, it's a healthy democracy.
Want to talk a little bit about the Habsburg Empire and your legacy. I want to come back to the book again. So you are Hungary's ambassador to the Holy See and the Sovereign Order of Malta. Your family reigned in Austria, Hungary, Germany, Spain, and quite a few other places.
Yes.
As you pointed out, you're the Archduke Eduard of Austria. You're a diplomat and a social media personality. I think the last time I checked, you nearly have 100,000 followers on Twitter, including me, by the way. And your wife, Baroness Maria Theresia von, help me on the pronunciation.
Gudenus.
Godinos.
Gudenos.
Okay. And you're the author of several books, including the children's book, Doobie the Double-Headed Eagle, volumes on Thomas Aquinas, not surprising because of your Catholic devotion, James Bond, that's surprising, and Harry Potter novels and screenplays. So I guess in the broadest sense, you're a Renaissance man. But what's it like being ambassador to the Holy See?
First of all, thank you very much for Renaissance, man. That's what I really aspire to be. Um, Second, ambassador to the Holy See is absolutely glorious. It means that, as I like to tell my Catholic friends, I get paid for going to Mass. Um, the, the joke is, of course, it's a joke, but it's also, in a way, it's also true because we go to Mass a lot here. Whenever another embassy has a national holiday celebration and the ambassadors go there, there's nearly always a Holy Mass with it. You regularly go to masses organized by the Holy See in St. Peter's Basilica or in other churches. And the fun thing is that you as a diplomat interact usually with ministers and with state secretaries. And in the Vatican, these ministers and state secretaries are all priests or bishops. So the people that you interact with and talk about concordates and problems and political things will at your next event say Holy Mass and give you communion. That's a very unique mix of experiences, and you really do classical diplomacy. In all other places, the most important part of your diplomacy is business. You're trying to get companies from your country a good deal with your host country. You're trying to sell weapons and buy weapons. This is part of diplomacy. In my embassy, not. This is classical, old-fashioned diplomacy in the multilateral style. You help each other. You help other ambassadors, and you are close to the Vatican, which is one of the most exciting places in the world because they are involved in every interesting place in the world, in every crisis in the world. They do mediation, and whatever happens in the world will have an echo in Rome far before usually the other media catch up with it, because the Vatican has the greatest spy network in the world, a net of parishes. Everything arrives in the Vatican. So the downside is you cannot bullshit your Vatican counterparts. They know everything about your country.
Yes, so there's this whole big network throughout the globe. The Habsburg Empire effectively ended after the First World War, right? And I wasn't sure if you're going to mention it in your book or it's, something that you don't discuss anymore. But the assassination in Sarajevo of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, but you do bring it up. And that to me is always fascinating. And if you don't mind me disabusing you, because we learned it in our school books, not in any great detail, and we read about it today, that was the trigger for the First World War. Is that your understanding of it, or do you have a different interpretation?
We shouldn't say what if. This is something that you're taught in history. You shouldn't think what if. But if you think, what if the car in which Franz Ferdinand sat in the narrow streets of Sarajevo wouldn't have turned around exactly at the spot where it turned around, because most people don't realize that the assassins had already made an assassination attempt at Franz Ferdinand, and it went wrong and it didn't work out. So they gave up and walked home. And on their way home, the car of Franz Ferdinand drove again past them. And the driver slowed down to turn around just beside Gavrilo-Pitz. In a different universe where the car would have stopped 2 roads before that and turned around, Franz Ferdinand would not have been killed. Franz Joseph would have died in 1916. Franz Ferdinand would have become emperor. There would have been no First World War, probably not in the same way the Bolshevik Revolution, the killing of the Russian Tsar, the fall of all the European empires, the hunger and the poverty after World War I that created the soil for Hitler, there wouldn't have been World War II and the Holocaust. All of that wouldn't have happened if the car would have stopped a few meters before. So in a way, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand is not just the beginning of the First World War, but it's the absolute end of an era of monarchies in Europe, of an era of a world was gone after that. And with the double whammy of World War I and II, it broke the back of European culture, of everything, of all the systems that were before. So yes, that one shot of Sarajevo really changed quite a lot.
So it sowed the seeds for extraordinary change, and we saw the rise of Adolf Hitler and many other changes that are freakish to really think about. So there were two essentially types of imperial dynasties throughout Europe. There was the Orthodox and the Catholic, and the Habsburgs are a very good example of it. And then there were the Protestant branches, as in, Britain and so on. I'm not a great defender of, imperial dynasties. Their rule in Ireland was, let's be honest about it, was quite dreadful. But you would separate yourself away from that crowd. That the Habsburgs were benevolent. They were clearly Catholic, and good stewards and good shepherds of their people.
This is my first book that you're talking about, of course. My first book is a shameless propaganda piece that depicts the Habsburgs as the greatest thing ever. And but I'm pretty certain that at least most of them really tried to be good shepherds. They felt a strong obligation to their people because they were Catholic, and they believed that God would one day ask them whether they used their power well for the good of their people. And they took that very, very seriously. I have a little inkling of that from direct experience, because I was fortunate enough to meet Empress Zita, the widow of Blessed Emperor Karl, the last emperor of the Habsburg Empire. And she told me how deeply Karl was impressed by the coronation in Hungary. He was crowned king of Hungary. He was anointed. He lay on the floor like a priest before the coronation. He said prayers that were deeply impressive. And those prayers involved a deep, deep, deep responsibility towards God and towards the subjects. And Karl took that terribly serious. He took it so serious that he offered up his pain and his sufferings during his final illness and his death for his people. So serious he took his position, even in exile as an emperor, that he had promised to God. And I think that's an echo of how the Habsburgs were over the last centuries. Therefore, I think I have some reason to say that I believe the Habsburgs took that really serious. They weren't giggling, maniacal tyrants, bathing in coins, in golden coins, and killing peasants. They weren't that caricature of rulers. I also want to add that my book was a great success in the United States. I think it's a great success. Americans are a democracy. They never had the experience of monarchy. But I think the heart of the American goes out to that upright quality that the Habsburgs stood for. And we were from the beginning never tempted to be ice-cold rulers and conquerors, because we always ruled over a complicated hodgepodge mix of different empires, kingdoms, dukedoms, princedoms that had to be kept in peace with each other. The Habsburgs from the beginning were always out for the diplomatic solution, always out for the family solution, and not for military victory and conquest.
Yeah, we don't have enough time to get further into this, and so maybe I will have to have you back. But the Russian experience of monarchy was certainly different than the Habsburgs. If we believe the history books and the documentaries on the last Tsars and so on, and the Romanovs. They're depicted as quite brutal and cruel. And of course, then we had the Bolshevik Revolution. If you could address that. And also quickly, another thing occurred, because you are a devout Catholic. I'm Catholic also. I'm proud to be called Catholic. There's a phrase used in Catholic circles called, or not called, but to talk about the error of Russia, how communism was spread throughout the world, presumably after the fall of the Romanovs and the Tsars. Your thoughts on that, and generally about the Habsburgs again?
John, I'm really not competent on the whole Russian topic. I never deeply looked into it, so I cannot judge whether the Romanovs were any worse or better than the Habsburgs. I believe that it's always a temptation if you are ruling over one single nation with one language. The Habsburgs never had that problem because we were always multilingual, multinational, multi-race, multi-faith, multi-everything. And that makes you humble. That makes you humble from the beginning. There is no danger of pride there. Add to that the Catholic faith. We are all aware, of course, that the entire 20th century was overshadowed by communism. Communism was, in a way, what followed the Romanov monarchy. And Our Lady in Fatima spoke about the danger of communism and of communism taking over the world and ruling. So yes, it's a big topic, but again, I am not really competent to talk on Russia because I never looked into that deeper.
Yes. Well, I want to get back to your book, and this struck me as being really interesting because it addresses the contemporary Catholic Church, the challenges and maybe the crisis of some kind, and the idea of having, as you call them, wholesome families. These are your words. I believe that the Catholic Church today will be renewed by praying families. We are suffering today from crisis of faith, of vocation, of leadership. The surest way to heal and repair the church, perhaps the only way, is through family prayer. Our pastors are tired, overworked, and overwhelmed. Sometimes they seem hopeless.
Yes, I totally, very strong. I would strongly underline every word of what you just read. The church is really in a very difficult place. In Ireland, even more than other where I don't have to tell you.
Yes. I'm in the United States today, by the way, but I am from Ireland originally, clearly.
Yes. I'm just saying because I feel a strong Irish, but in the United States it's a bit different. In the United States it's a bit different because you have strong parishes. In Europe, this is absolutely not the case. And what I feel is that the path to healing of the church goes through families. Families that grow up in prayer, families where the children see their father pray the rosary, their mother queue up for confession regularly, where parents lead the children to the sacraments. Unfortunately, you cannot guarantee that this will happen in the parish. Sometimes parishes are more about community than about faith. And it doesn't happen in school anymore if you're not lucky enough to be in a school where faith plays a role. So it has to happen in the family. And the great thing about a large and numerous family is that children don't only learn from their parents, they learn from their siblings. That's one of the most important influences. Many of my younger children go to their elder sisters when they want to know about faith or about such things. And that's another of my strong plaidoyers for a large family. Faith, passing on the faith is easier if you're a large family. And it gives you security. And I believe that the path to healing the church goes through the old means. You don't need new pastoral projects. It's the sacraments. It's the sacraments. It's going to Mass. It's developing a personal relationship with God. It's personal prayer. All these things will help us and heal us. But the place where you will encourage this, in my humble opinion, are the families now, and in 1 or 2 generations, again, the parishes, and then afterwards, really good bishops and good priests. But we're still in the aftershocks of a few very difficult years since the 1960s. and it'll take a while. It'll take a while, but I'm very, very hopeful, especially after my visits in the States, where I meet families that pray together, and Europe is looking to the States in this sense.
Yeah, and also because you're a communicator, you're a writer, you're in the movie industry and before your career as a diplomat, but you mentioned ideologies, and because you do have a section on it about homeschooling, private schooling, and Catholic schooling, and it's so important. You say that parents realize that kids are very impressionable at a very early age, and so they need to listen. They need to have good leaders that don't mislead in terms of raising them, for example, in the Catholic faith.
Yes, I believe that when I was young and went to school, you could still send children to school and more or less expect them to come out more or less unscathed. I don't think that's the case anymore. And while I don't believe that everybody should be homeschooling or sending their children to private schools, and most people can't afford that, you should be very, very vigilant and very, very interested in what your children learn at school. And ideally, you should pass them on all the core values before they even get to school. That's, again, the great thing about a numerous family when those children come back from school and have been confronted with a plethora of crazy ideas. Then they will talk them through with their siblings and their elder siblings, and then they will realize this is reality and the other thing is just ideology.
My final question, as you look across the world today, all the troubles we have, the Middle East, Europe, Israel, conflict even in Africa, and just so many problems in homes, divorce rate, and so on, and even big questions about economic survival. There are a lot of people questioning, whether we're headed to a major collapse because of the rise in global debt. What's your summary, your big picture for the next 4 or 5 years? Are you optimistic, or are you keeping an open mind about where the world will be and where Europe will be and the Catholic Church?
I would distinguish between optimism and hope. I'm full of hope because I'm a Catholic and I believe that God is the Lord of history. I am not optimistic if I look at the current state of society, be it locally, be it worldwide. I'm very, very worried about the effects of globalism and globalization. I believe the healthy path lies in local thinking and in subsidiarity, as I point out in my first book, and I believe that the hope for the church and the hope for the world are numerous families that are rooted in their traditions, that are rooted in faith, and they will heal the world, but it might take a while.
Eduard Habsburg, Archduke of Austria, Hungary's ambassador to the Holy See and the Sovereign Order of Malta. Thank you for a fascinating conversation, and best of luck with your new book, Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World. And Merry Christmas to you and your family and to all your friends throughout the Vatican and in Hungary and in Europe.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to Dig Life Deep with John Aidan Byrne. You can reach the host in the U.S. at 973-529-4699. That's 973-529-4699. 973-529-4699. Email byrnedesk@gmail.com. That's byrnedesk, B-Y-R-N-E, desk@gmail.com. byrnedesk@gmail.com. Subscribe for free.